At Oxford University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, a student defended Hamas and called Israel's response a genocide. Jordan Peterson didn't just respond. He easily dismantled the entire narrative.
Important, the Israel-Gaza war. On October 7, 2023, you tweeted, "Give them hell, Netanyahu." Since October 7, 50,000 Palestinians have died, 13,000 children, almost 97,000 injured. United Nations, human rights organizations such as Amnesty International have all declared this as one of the genocide of the 21st century. Are you satisfied with your tweet, and did you get what you're asking for?
Well, you might describe that as a loaded question. I would say that I'm not satisfied about anything that's happened on October 7th or in the aftermath. You'd have to be a fool to be satisfied with it. So,
That itself is just a great response.
of course I'm not satisfied. What was the appropriate response to October 7th? Bring out the feather bed? The kid gloves? Not precisely. What happened on October 7th was a catastrophe. And it was obviously not something that could be ignored. And you might say, well, what's the right way forward? Well, there's a Canadian poet, Leonard Cohen, he said, "There's no decent place to stand in a massacre." You can find yourself in a situation where there have been so many mistakes made by you and by everyone around you that all of your alternatives are horrible. And that's what happens when war breaks out. And so, no, you'd be a fool to be satisfied with that. But there are situations where all the options are terrible. And you might say, well, how do those situations come about? And you'll certainly experience this in your own life. If you aim badly enough and you make enough mistakes, especially mistakes that are part and parcel of your own blindness and foolishness, you'll find yourself in a situation where, well, it's a situation that's akin to hell. Well, every single option in front of you is brutal and awful. And so how do you endeavor to conduct yourself so that you don't find yourself there? It's like you watch your bloody step and you keep your eyes open and you pray that you're not foolish enough to embroil yourself in some catastrophe. And so, well, we're way past that whenever a war breaks out, obviously. There wouldn't be a war, I suppose, as well, as if people didn't disagree profoundly about how they might proceed. And it's not like I have any simple solutions to the constant catastrophe of the Middle East, and neither does anyone else. But I guess I suppose that's also why I'm interested in psychology more than politics, because I actually think that the solution to such things is worked out at the level of the individual and not at the level of the state, even though the state has to involve itself, I suppose, when individual responsibility is abdicated. So no, of course I'm not satisfied. Who would be satisfied? So
I want to follow up more on an ideological question there as well. You have outspoken about censorship, ideological conformity, and authoritarianism, especially when it comes to free speech, the ability to say what you want, to stand for things. But one thing, especially within the Western ideals, we have seen a double standard when it comes to critiques and those vocal voices speaking for Palestinian rights. In the last 2 years, students protesting, protests have been curbed, mass surveillances, whether in the UK or the United States. Why have you not condemned this suppression of free speech? Is this not a textbook case
There's been very little bloody evidence of free speech suppression, for example, in this issue. In my country, in Canada, there's been a plethora of demonstrations on the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine side. And so the idea that that's been squelched somehow is preposterous. There were literal encampments for months in my university, in University of Toronto. And I can't imagine a situation where a more contentious issue had been allowed more free expression than the protests that emerged in the aftermath of October 7th. So I see no evidence whatsoever for a double standard. Quite the contrary, I would say. In the West, there's been more freedom of speech for the purveyors of the pro-Palestinian message than there are in many Arab countries, for example. And so I don't see for a second that there's a double standard. Now, does that mean that there's even-handed and perfect justice at every moment with regards to all of the elements of discourse around October 7th? Well, obviously not, because nothing is perfect. But to construe that as prejudice on the part of the West, particularly in relationship to the legacy media of the universities, if anything, they've erred on the opposite side. And we've seen a dreadful rise in, say, anti-Semitic sentiment and so forth in the aftermath of October 7th. So I think the notion that there's a double standard that's differentially punished those who rose to support the Palestinian cause, I think that's a preposterous claim. I don't see any evidence for that at all.
A tremendous point in how he just drops subtly, and this is part of his skill of communicating, where he doesn't put it in the face of the other, but he drops it. What are you talking about? There's more freedom of speech to support the Palestinians than there's ever been for anything. And the little point that he drops is far more freedom of speech than the Arab countries permit.
Well, let me give you some evidence. I mean, supporters of Palestinians, especially students in the US and this country, were blacklisted. In Harvard, Columbia, students were not allowed to graduate. They were not given their degrees just for the sake of protesting outside universities. Surely these are examples of double standards.
It wasn't a consequence of protesting. It was a consequence of conducting themselves in an absolutely atrocious manner. There's rules of conduct for protest, and the students did everything they could to provoke the authorities, most of whom are in an ideological position to support the protest movements that we described a priori. They behaved so atrociously that even the idiot authorities who were charged with regulating the behavior of students on campus were finally forced to do something about it. It had nothing to do with differential treatment of the protesters. I mean, how long were there encampments at the University of Toronto? Like 3 months? Like, that's not tolerance, and that's not even free speech. That's weakness in the face of... It's weakness in the face of preposterously narcissistic and coercive behavior. And so...
Again, tremendous. Now, he doesn't fall into the trap of the questioner who says, well, look, they didn't graduate. They got punished for the protesting. He says it has nothing to do with protesting. It has to do with them violating the law so many times and being extremely aggressive, destroying property, etc., etc., etc.
I don't buy any of the presumptions that underlie that question.
Jordan Peterson is very, very skilled in debating and discussing, in knowing how not to raise the temperature of the room while getting in very, very clearly the points that he's making. And it's worthwhile watching him just to learn how to have these debates with people.